In the autumn of 1943, as Allied forces advanced northward from Sicily, the Italian fascists, desperate to cover their tracks, began emptying their secret camps. In a remote compound, 180 prisoners were packed into cold barracks, awaiting transport. Through the thin walls, they could hear the dreaded sound of an approaching train. Another transport, they feared, to take more of them away. The train's wheels groaned as it slowed, and the screech of the brakes sliced through the heavy silence of the southern Italian region of Basilicata. The guards at Pisticci camp didn't see anything unusual, a civilian train arriving just like any other. The train lurched to a stop with a sudden jolt, and everything went silent. Inside the train, a gangster-turned-legionnaire checked his weapon for the final time. An aristocrat who could drive locomotives listened for any sign of alarm. A disgraced tank commander steadied his breathing. They were 80 kilometers deep into enemy territory, and they had just stolen an entire train. Now, the real mission was about to begin. The summer of 1943 saw the Allied invasion of Italy after the fall of Sicily, a bold assault into the heart of Axis Europe. But the fight for Italy would be far from easy. German forces, deeply entrenched, were determined to hold every inch of ground, transforming the rugged terrain into a battlefield of attrition. Every road, town, and stronghold was fiercely defended. Every Allied operation had to be meticulously planned and executed. In the early chaos of the Italian campaign, the British Special Air Service, or SAS, proved to be an invaluable asset. They had landed in Taranto on September 9, 1943, just 6 days after the initial advance into Italy. Operating deep behind enemy lines, the SAS specialized in sabotage, destroying supply depots, cutting communications, and rescuing civilians trapped in the crossfire. With Italy's imminent surrender, their mission expanded to liberating Allied prisoners of war across the country, though the full horrors of Nazi concentration camps were still unknown. But one camp, hidden from the world, needed their immediate attention. Intelligence had come from a man named Željko, a Yugoslav prisoner who had escaped from a little-known concentration camp in southern Italy. Held in the Pisticci concentration camp, deep in Italy's Basilicata region, Željko had endured months of brutality alongside Jews, resistance fighters, intellectuals, artists, and Catholic priests. The Nazis had used the camp as a holding area for prisoners captured after their occupation of Italy. But now, the prisoners, Jews and resistance fighters alike, were being moved. Željko understood what this meant and knew he had to act. Using his knowledge of the camp's routines, Željko managed to slip past the guards. Under cover of darkness, he moved through enemy territory, evading German patrols and making his way toward the Allied lines. By the time he reached the Allied bridgehead, he was exhausted, disheveled, and near starvation. But he had one urgent message. The Pisticci camp was about to be emptied. The prisoners were being shipped off to their doom. Željko shared his knowledge of the camp's location, how the prisoners were guarded, and the atrocities he had witnessed. He begged the SAS to act before it was too late. The Pisticci camp, run by a notorious Italian fascist colonel, had been kept hidden by the Germans, and its existence was a secret they were desperate to protect. But with Željko's information, the SAS had no choice but to act quickly. Hundreds of lives were at stake. The mission required a leader who understood the consequences of hesitation, and Major Joseph Cary-Elwes was the man for the job. Cary-Elwes was the kind of officer who stood out in any crowd. His aristocratic background gave him an air of distinction. Trained at Sandhurst, Cary-Elwes had served in the British Army with traditional rigor. But his path took a surprising turn when David Stirling, the founder of the SAS, saw potential in him. Cary-Elwes's sharp mind and resourcefulness made him a natural fit for the SAS. His military career was defined by an unusual skill, an affinity for trains. As Cary-Elwes later recalled, driving a locomotive was one of the skills we had learned in the course of SAS training. This knowledge would prove crucial to the mission, allowing him to devise a plan that would save 180 prisoners. Cary-Elwes and the SAS wouldn't be alone in this mission. They would receive help from members of the French Foreign Legion, including Raymond Couraud, aka Captain Jack William Raymond Lee. Couraud, a former gangster turned Foreign Legionnaire and French resistance fighter, had already seen the worst of war. He had fought in the 1942 Operation Chariot raid on Saint-Nazaire, where he was shot twice and left for dead. Afterward, he joined the 2nd SAS, recruited by Colonel Bill Sterling, David Sterling's older brother. Couraud's reputation for rescuing Jewish families and leading sabotage missions in Nazi-occupied France made him an ideal candidate for the SAS. By 1943, Couraud had joined their ranks, bringing his expertise in sabotage and logistics to the mission. Finally, Cary-Elwes, Couraud, and the rest of the team would be joined by Charles "Charlie" Hackney, a man seeking redemption after a string of misfortunes. As a tank commander in North Africa, Hackney had survived 2 catastrophic attacks that wiped out his entire crew each time. After the second attack, he refused to take command again and was arrested for desertion, facing a court-martial that could lead to execution. In his cell, awaiting his fate, the door opened and Cary-Elwes stepped in with an offer. Join the SAS or face the consequences. Hackney, desperate for a way out, accepted the offer and joined the SAS, bringing his experience and tactical knowledge to the mission. Together, Cary-Elwes, Couraud, and Hackney made an unlikely but effective team. They knew they couldn't rely on a standard raid. Instead, they would hijack a train. The Italian railway system, while vast, had vulnerabilities. The Pisticci concentration camp was 80 kilometers behind enemy lines, and the Nazis had recently planned to transport the prisoners to Germany, so their control of the rail network was tight. The train wasn't just a way to infiltrate Pisticci. It was also the means of transporting the freed prisoners to safety. Planning the mission was complicated. Getting 50 men into position behind enemy lines required stealth and secrecy. Couraud worked to arrange safe houses and secure passage for the Commandos, while Cary-Elwes made sure the train's route remained clear. Every aspect of the operation relied on the others. The French resistance holding their ground, the Commandos slipping into position, and the logistics of getting the train back without alerting enemy patrols. The plan was set in motion. The train was to be hijacked on September 12th at Chiatona station, 20 kilometers west of Taranto. The Commandos and the French resistance had already infiltrated the area and positioned themselves out of sight. Cary-Elwes surveyed the tracks, mentally running through every detail of the plan, checking every turn, every switch, and every checkpoint. They were ready. The train's approach sent a wave of tension through the team. Hackney kept watch for any signs of detection. A quiet murmur spread through the group as the rumble of the locomotive grew louder. Hackney, coordinating with the French fighters, signaled the attack. In seconds, the Commandos stormed the platform, rushing toward the locomotive, and the armed guards already stationed there. The French resistance fighters moved quickly, taking positions to cover the train's exit routes. Cary-Elwes was the first to board the train, slipping into the conductor's cabin with practiced ease, his mind already focused on the next phase. He quickly worked the controls. But just as the train was ready to move, he stepped off to lead a separate patrol of Willys MB Jeeps, light utility vehicles well suited for high-speed, deep penetration missions behind enemy lines. Armed with twin Vickers machine guns, 50 caliber Brownings, Bren guns, Tommy guns, grenades, and explosives, their jeeps were ready to deliver overwhelming firepower to secure crossroads and junctions. The train lurched forward, its wheels screeching against the tracks. The other commandos and resistance fighters scrambled to secure the last cars, pushing back the remaining Italian guards and forcing them to surrender. The train was now in their control. On September 13, 1943, the train, now carrying SAS troops and French Foreign Legion fighters, set off from Chiatona, speeding west into enemy territory. But the 80-kilometer route to Pisticci was far from easy. As the train rumbled on, the commandos faced numerous obstacles. Enemy patrols were a constant threat. Hackney, whose role was critical in maintaining the train's speed and course, kept in constant communication with other SAS units positioned ahead. The terrain itself posed challenges, sharp turns, steep inclines, and the ever-present threat of detection. But the team moved with focus. Hackney dealt with every complication that arose, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of enemy movement. A mistake was not an option. The mission had to stay under the radar, and every second counted. Finally, on September 14th, the train neared the outskirts of Pisticci. The prison guards stood watch, bored and alert in equal measure. Just another Italian commuter train rumbling toward them. They had seen it all before. Lewis recalls the guards' reaction. They see an Italian train steaming up to the camp. What's there to be suspicious of? But then, the train doors swung open. Lewis goes on, "It's only when they burst off that train and storm into the camp, guns blazing, that the enemy guards realize this is an assault. It's inconceivable to them that this is really happening." Some guards didn't even have time to draw their weapons before being taken down. Others tried to resist, but their efforts were futile. The attackers were already inside, and any chance of holding them off evaporated. In an instant, the guards found themselves helpless, overwhelmed by the speed and precision of the assault. Inside the camp, the prisoners, many emaciated and broken, didn't understand what was happening. The noise from the gunfire, the shouts from the commandos, and the sudden movement of the guards were all too much. The prisoners, initially hesitant, were quickly rounded up. Some feared it was another trap, but the commandos reassured them, and soon the camp was in full disarray. Cary-Elwes led the charge through the barracks, clearing rooms and driving the Nazi guards back. Corrad and Hackney worked alongside the SAS, providing backup and ensuring the prisoners were evacuated. The Nazis, now trapped in their own camp, fought with desperation, but it was useless. The commandos had them outnumbered, and their surprise assault had broken their resolve. Cary-Elwes and Corrad moved quickly toward the commandant's office. Inside, the fascist colonel was trying to organize a counterattack, but it was already too late. The commandos burst into the room, and the colonel, seeing his fate sealed, tried to escape. But before he could flee, Corrad grabbed him, overpowering the man and dragging him back into the office. With the prisoners secured, the commandos began the difficult task of moving them to the train. The process was complicated. Some of the prisoners could barely walk. Others were so weak they needed to be carried. The train was waiting, but getting them aboard without alerting any nearby Axis forces was key. Hackney worked tirelessly, coordinating the evacuation. The commandos pushed the prisoners toward the train, moving quickly. Hackney ensured the path was clear, using everything at his disposal to keep the train undetected as it began its return journey. The ride back was just as tense as the journey in. Enemy forces had been alerted, and the commandos had to navigate through dangerous territory. The train's tracks, while speeding them along, were also a potential trap if the wrong patrol spotted them. The train sped through the night, the men and prisoners silently hoping they would make it back to Allied lines. In the end, they did. The train reached the safety of Allied territory, and the mission, against all odds, was a success. The prisoners were freed, the fascist commandant captured, and the raid became one of the most daring operations the SAS had ever undertaken. But for a long time, nobody would know of their bravery. The success of the raid on Pisticci didn't lead to public recognition or military acclaim. Instead, the British government chose to suppress details of the operation, ensuring it faded from history for nearly 8 decades. The British authorities feared that revealing the raid's true nature would expose Italy's concentration camps, largely unknown to the outside world. These camps, established by Mussolini's fascist regime, were hidden from public knowledge, and exposing them would draw unwanted attention to Italy's role in the Holocaust. This suppression was motivated by the desire to end the war and bring the enemy to heel. As Lewis explained, if you publicize the concentration camps to the British, American, and wider Allied publics, it would demonize the enemy. That would make them less likely to surrender, and the war would go on longer. In post-war diplomacy, the raid risked highlighting the collaboration between Italian fascists and Nazis, which was a delicate issue for both sides. Suppressing the operation helped shape a more favorable narrative for Italy, portraying it as a nation liberated from fascist rule. This allowed Italy to distance itself from the Nazi horrors it had once been complicit in just 1 month before switching sides on October 13, 1943. After the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in April 1945, news of similar camps in Italy emerged in Britain. Yet, the SAS raid on Pisticci remained covered up. This meant that for the men involved, the operation would remain an invisible chapter in their careers. Lewis notes, "You would think that a mission like this would lead to an array of decorations, but no medals were awarded for it." Joseph Cary-Elwes, who had commanded the operation, would go on to have a distinguished career, but his role in the Pisticci raid would remain unmentioned in official military records. Raymond Courreau, the former gangster known for his time in the French resistance and his role in saving Jews from the Gestapo, continued his work with the SAS, but received little recognition for his part in one of the unit's most audacious missions. Charles Hackney, once a tank commander with a storied history, never saw his bravery or crucial role in the raid acknowledged by the higher-ups. It wasn't until years later that pieces of the story began to emerge through research. It took the persistent efforts of historians and the slow release of declassified documents to piece together the full scope and significance of the raid. Eventually, the raid would receive recognition in military historian Damian Lewis's 2023 book, SAS, Forged in Hell. As for public exposure, he comments, "If you wrote this as a Hollywood movie outline, people would say, 'No, no, no, that's too far-fetched.' But this absolutely happened. It's absolutely true."